The 6-year-old had no idea she had just loaded the first bullet into the chamber of a war that had been silent for 6 years. The lobby of the Beaumont Hotel sat under a midday hush that only expensive places ever managed, the kind of quiet built out of wine-red carpet, polished brass, and a crystal chandelier that threw slow-moving light across the marble floor. It was a Tuesday in early March. Outside, Boston was gray and brittle with late winter wind. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lilies from the florist's cart near the concierge desk. Dominic Moretti sat at the lobby bar with Marcus Webb, 2 tumblers of amber whiskey between them. Neither touched. They were not here to drink. They were here to finalize a quiet conversation about the purchase of a 12-property hotel chain, the kind of conversation that happened in public, so that nobody would assume it was private. Dominic was 37, charcoal wool coat folded over the stool beside him, black shirt, no tie, a platinum band on the 4th finger of his right hand, etched with the belt and sword of Orion, 7 tiny black diamonds catching the chandelier light whenever he moved. Only 2 of those rings had ever been made. One was on his hand. The other had been buried 6 years ago under the frost-bitten soil of Mount Auburn Cemetery, in a closed coffin that had held a shoe, a purse, and nothing else. The little girl appeared at his elbow without warning. She was small even for 6. Navy peacoat 2 sizes too warm. A stuffed cat with 1 missing ear held firmly under her left arm. She stopped beside the bar stool and looked up, not at Dominic's face but at his hand, the way children look at something interesting on a shelf just above their reach. 8 men stationed within 20 meters of Dominic Moretti registered her in the same instant. Hands shifted inside coats, not drawn, just ready. The child did not notice any of it. "Sir," she said, in the calm, curious voice of a person asking about the weather, "my mom has a ring just like yours." Marcus Webb stopped breathing. Dominic Moretti, who had once sat across from 15 capos in a locked room in New Jersey and negotiated his way out without blinking, went pale. Only for a second. But Marcus, who had known him for 20 years, saw it. Dominic looked down at the girl, then, slowly, at her hand, at her hair, at the small, dark mole on her left cheek. His jaw tightened once and released. He said nothing. From across the lobby, moving fast, came a woman in a gray knit cap, coat half-buttoned, breath catching in her throat. Lily, you can't run off like that." She arrived at the bar. She reached for the child's shoulder. Then she lifted her head. Her eyes found Dominic's. She froze. Dominic looked at a face he had buried 6 years ago. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. Around them, the lobby kept going, a bellhop wheeling a cart, an elevator chime, a woman laughing at the concierge desk, and none of it reached the 2 feet of air between them. 1 question from a child. 6 years of lies. And 3 people in the lobby of the Beaumont Hotel that afternoon, not one of them would walk out unchanged. 6 years before that frozen moment in the Beaumont Hotel lobby, there was a different kind of silence, the silence of a highway at night, under a sky throwing ice. March 14th. Providence, Rhode Island. 10:40 at night. Claire Moretti was 22 years old. She had finished her master's in literature 4 months earlier, married Dominic 2 years before that, and was 5 months pregnant with a daughter she had learned about at 3 that afternoon. She was driving home on I-95 North from Women and Infants Hospital, the ultrasound photo tucked into her wallet on the passenger seat. She had called Dominic the moment she got to her car. He was in Manhattan, a meeting that had run long. She had told him, voice shaking a little, that it was a girl. He had laughed the way he only laughed when he was alone with her, and promised he would be home before midnight. She was 20 minutes outside Boston when the sky cracked open. Hail, not rain, hard white pellets the size of marbles. She slowed to 50, 40. Then the brake pedal went soft under her foot. A black SUV surged up in her rear view, pulled even, and cut hard to the right. The impact took her across 3 lanes, through the guardrail, and over the embankment toward the Blackstone River. The car rolled twice. Glass, cold. The water was 2 feet deep. That was what saved her. The shoulder belt she had double-checked at the hospital, a habit of pregnancy, held her body in place. The cold drove through the broken window and brought her back before her lungs could fill. The first voice she heard was a woman's. "Stay still, honey. I've got you." Elena Vasquez was 34, an ER nurse at Miriam Hospital, driving home to New Hampshire. She had seen the taillights go over the rail. She was there before anyone else. She cut Claire's seatbelt with the folding knife from her glove box, dragged her out, laid her on the wet gravel of the riverbank. Claire grabbed Elena's wrist. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't call an ambulance. They'll find me. Please." Elena stopped moving. In 15 years of nursing, she had learned the difference between a concussion talking and a person who knew exactly what she was saying. Claire twisted the ring off her finger, platinum, Orion, 7 black diamonds, and pressed it into Elena's palm. If I die, give this to Dominic Moretti. If I live, don't tell anyone I did. Elena closed her hand over the ring. She carried the young woman up the slope to her own car and drove 2 hours north through the hail to a small house in Portsmouth. 3 days later, the news on Elena's kitchen television said that Dominic Moretti's wife had been killed. The body had not been recovered. A closed casket service was scheduled for the following week. Claire watched with both hands on her stomach. She did not cry. She understood, with a clarity colder than the river, what the news meant. Whoever had cut her brake line had known she was on that road at that hour. Only 4 people had known. 1 was her husband. The other 3 were close enough to him to eat at his table. She could not go home, not until she knew which of them had done it. Elena's younger brother worked at the Rhode Island DMV. Within a week, Claire Donovan Moretti had a new license, a new social security number, and a new name, Grace Bennett. 4 months later, in the upstairs bedroom of Elena's house, with no hospital record filed under her real name, Grace Bennett gave birth to a daughter. She named her Lily. It had been Dominic's favorite flower since the first spring they had walked together along the Charles. 6 years later, the man who had lost her was learning, still, how to carry it. 2 days before the lobby of the Beaumont Hotel, a Sunday afternoon, the 34th floor of Moretti Holdings in Boston's financial district. Dominic Moretti was 37. He sat behind a desk of black walnut in a corner office that faced the harbor, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a glass of water untouched at his elbow. The room was quiet, in the way that expensive rooms were quiet, no street sound, no hum of traffic, only the faint whisper of the building's own ventilation. The men who worked for him no longer called him Nico. They had stopped sometime in the first year after the funeral. The younger capos in New York had given him a different name, one that had stuck across the eastern seaboard, and that he had never asked them to retire. The Winter King. He had not corrected them. He had not earned the name by wanting it. He had earned it by surviving what he should not have survived, and by the particular way a man's face settled when a part of him had been removed and the rest had kept breathing. 6 years. He had hired 3 separate investigators. He had paid 2 retired FBI analysts to review the accident file line by line. He had bought the tow lot where Claire's car had been impounded and had the wreckage shipped to a private garage in Quincy, where a forensic engineer had crawled through every inch of the brake assembly for 4 months. The police file said weather. Hail on a night stretch of I-95. A single vehicle loss of control. The engineer said something different, quietly, over a tumbler of bourbon. He said the brake line looked clean, but clean in a way that clean brake lines were not supposed to look. Dominic had paid him, thanked him, and filed the finding away beside everything else he could not prove. They had never found her body. Only a shoe, a handbag, a patch of blood on the driver's seat that matched her DNA. The coffin at Mount Auburn had been empty. Ray Castellano had stood beside him at the graveside that morning, the only man Dominic had allowed within arm's length. That night, in the study at Beacon Hill, Ray had poured them both a drink and said, quietly, "Boss, sometimes, to keep your mind, you have to let the dead go. She would want you to keep living." Dominic had believed him. He had leaned on Ray for 6 years. Now he flipped open the folder on his desk. The Beaumont acquisition, 12 properties, East Coast, family held, the kind of legitimate chain a man could pour offshore money into and come out the other side with a clean portfolio. The sit-down with the owners was Tuesday at noon, in the flagship lobby itself. Ray had suggested the meeting. Ray had chosen the Beaumont. Ray had set the time. Dominic had not questioned any of it. On the desk beside the folder, his right hand rested palm down. The platinum band caught the afternoon light. He turned it, once, twice, 3 times, around his finger, a motion so ingrained he no longer noticed making it. He had done it every morning for 6 years, before putting on his coat. The door opened. Marcus Webb came in with a second folder under his arm, reading glasses pushed up into his gray hair. "Your notes for tomorrow," Marcus said, "and the bank has the wire staged for Wednesday." Dominic nodded without looking up. Marcus paused at the door. He had known this man since they were both 25. "You doing all right, Nico?" Dominic turned toward the window. Boston in late afternoon light, brass-colored along the harbor. "Some wounds don't heal, Marcus. You just carry them until you don't." Marcus left. Dominic sat a long time after, hand turning the ring. 35 miles south, in a classroom in Providence, a 6-year-old was being asked to trace the 3 stars of a hunter's belt with a yellow pencil. He did not know. 35 miles south, On the second floor of a red brick row house on Benefit Street, the child tracing the hunter's belt was walking home from school, her hand in the hand of a woman the world believed to be dead. Providence, Rhode Island. The same Sunday afternoon. The woman the neighbors knew as Grace Bennett was 28 years old. She worked at the Rochambeau branch of the Providence Public Library, 3 blocks from the apartment she rented under a fake name. 2 rooms, a kitchenette, a radiator that hissed in the winter, a window that looked out onto a maple tree Lily had named Martha the first autumn she was old enough to talk. The library job had not been an accident. Claire had chosen it on purpose. A library card gave her legal access to newspaper archives, court records, public-facing FBI bulletins, property filings, incorporation documents. A staff login gave her more. She never used her own laptop for any of it. Once a week, she drove 40 minutes to the Warwick branch, or north to Pawtucket, or across the state line to Attleboro, and signed into a public terminal under whichever Grace-adjacent alias she had not used the month before. She kept a notebook. Leather. Ordinary. She wrote in it in a code of her own invention that Lily had once asked about and she had described as grown-up grocery lists. Inside the code were 47 names. The full inner circle of the Moretti organization, reconstructed over 6 years from news clippings, court dockets, wedding announcements, obituaries, funeral photographs, and one retired reporter named Harold Finch. Harold had written about the Moretti family for 30 years at the Providence Journal before a heart attack forced him into early retirement. Claire had reached him through an anonymous email account run through a free library terminal. She had told him she was a graduate student, writing about organized labor and the waterfront. He had, over the course of 2 years, fed her documents he had never been allowed to print. It was through Harold that she had seen the original accident report. It was through Harold that she had traced the black SUV that had come alongside her on I-95, the plates scrubbed, the paint recoated, the vehicle registered to a Delaware shell that dissolved back into the Bianchi family of Boston after 4 layers of paperwork. Bianchi. The name had never been a surprise. They had been her husband's rivals before she had ever met him. What she had not found, in 6 years, was the person inside Dominic's own house who had told them where she would be that night. Mornings she went to the library. Afternoons she walked the 6 blocks to St. Mary's Elementary and collected a daughter whose teachers called her our little lawyer for the way she asked follow-up questions. Evenings she made pasta, or soup, or whatever was on sale at the East Side Market. Nights, after Lily was asleep with the stuffed cat called Captain tucked under her chin, Claire opened the notebook. Lily believed that her father had been a good man who died before she was born. Claire had given her one soft, slightly out-of-focus photograph and a story about a car accident and a brave smile. Lily had never pressed. Children sensed, sometimes, where the soft places were. In a wooden box at the back of Claire's closet, under a folded winter blanket, was a second platinum ring, an Orion band, 7 black diamonds, the one she had commissioned for Dominic the spring they became engaged, identical to the one she had made for herself. She had left it at home the morning of the accident because her fingers had been swollen with pregnancy. The ring she had pressed into Elena's hand that night on the riverbank had been her plain wedding band. Elena had not known the difference. No one had. The Orion ring had been waiting in a box for 6 years. Yesterday morning, at the break room table of the Rochambeau branch, Claire had opened the Boston Globe. Front page, business section. A photograph taken at a charity gala. Dominic in a black suit, looking past the camera the way he always had. Beside him, 1 half-step back, a man in black leather gloves. The caption identified him as Raymond Castellano, senior counsel. Claire had looked at that face for a long time. The jawline was wrong. The hairline had moved. But the eyes were the eyes she had seen for half a second through a windshield on a highway in the hail. She had set the paper down and gone into the staff bathroom and been sick. By evening, she had booked a 2-night stay at a small hotel in Cambridge and a pair of Amtrak tickets on the morning Acela. She had told Lily they were going on a birthday trip. March 18th, her daughter was turning 6. Lily, who had never seen Boston, had gone to bed glowing. Claire had gone to bed with the Orion ring out of its box, resting on the nightstand beside her, and had not slept. 2 days later, at 11:46 on a Tuesday morning, the plan Claire had written out on a yellow legal pad at her kitchen table began to come apart. It had been a simple plan. 3 steps. Arrive at the Beaumont lobby 10 minutes before the noon meeting. Sit long enough in the cafe alcove to confirm Ray Castellano's face from across 40 feet of marble. Leave. A photograph committed to memory was enough. She did not need to be seen. Lily had been installed at a small round table in the cafe with a glass of apple juice, a chocolate croissant she was allowed to have only because it was the day after her birthday, and a paperback called The Secret of the Hollow Tree. Captain sat propped against the sugar bowl. 10 minutes, Claire had said. Don't move from this chair. If anyone asks, you're waiting for your mom. Count the people in red scarves. Lily had nodded solemnly. She was good at counting. Claire had crossed to the bank of elevators and gone up to the 3rd floor, where the private meeting rooms were. She did not need to go inside any of them. She only needed to walk the carpeted hallway once, slowly, as if looking for a conference that was not hers, and past the door of the Beaumont salon, where a Moretti nameplate had been set out on a brass easel. She saw him through the partly open door. Ray Castellano, seated at the far end of the table, sorting papers into 2 piles. Black leather gloves, even here, even indoors. The eyes. She turned before he could raise his head and walked, not fast, back to the elevator. Down in the cafe, Lily had gotten to 43 red scarves and then lost count because a lady had walked past with a dog in a tote bag. Captain had slid off the chair onto the carpet under the table. Lily had gone after him. When she came back up with the stuffed cat in her fist, a man was walking past her table toward the lobby bar, and on the 4th finger of his right hand was a platinum band she had seen 1,000 times in her own house. She got up. She followed. Dominic Moretti had settled onto the 2nd stool at the lobby bar, while Marcus Webb spoke quietly to a hotel manager across the room about a final detail on the meeting setup. He was not drinking. The tumbler in front of him held water with a single olive, because the bartender had asked, and because he had learned years ago that holding a glass was an instruction to the room to stand down. A small weight arrived at his elbow. He looked down. A girl of about 6, in a navy peacoat, holding a gray stuffed cat with one missing ear. She was not looking at his face. She was looking at his hand. 2 of his men, stationed against the pillars on either side of the bar, began to move. Dominic lifted one finger from the marble, a motion the size of a breath, and they stopped. He did not threaten children. He had no patience for men who did. The child spoke. Sir, my mom has a ring just like yours. Around them, the lobby kept moving. Nothing in Dominic's face changed. Inside his chest, something he had taught himself not to feel for 6 years struck once against his ribs. What's your mom's name, kid? Grace, the little girl said. Then, without pause, can I have the olive in your drink? He looked at her for another second. The dark mole on her left cheek, the slope of her nose, the shape of her mouth when she waited for an answer. He took the toothpick out of his glass and held it out. Go ahead. She accepted the olive in 2 small fingers and put it carefully into her mouth. That was when he heard the voice from the elevators. Lily, honey, you can't. The voice broke off. He did not turn around right away. He knew. The way a man knows when a storm front has shifted, that if he turned around, the world he had learned to live in would end. He turned around. A woman in a gray knit cap stood 6 feet behind him, coat half buttoned, one hand raised toward her daughter, and frozen in the air. Her eyes found his. 6 years of silence broke in 2 seconds. Neither of them moved. Dominic rose from the stool the way a man rises in a dream, slowly, in case too much pressure in any direction would dissolve what he was seeing. Behind her, at the far bank of elevators, the doors slid open. Ray Castellano stepped out, scanning the lobby for his boss with the brisk efficiency of a man who had timed the meeting to the minute. He saw the back of Dominic's head. He saw the child. He saw the woman. For the first time in the 12 years Dominic had known him, Raymond Castellano's face went the color of wet paper. Claire caught that color from 30 feet away. She understood. He had recognized her. She stepped forward in one motion, seized Lily's free hand, and leaned in close enough that her breath reached Dominic's collar. If you love me, she whispered, don't follow. Don't trust him. I'll find you. Then she was moving. The revolving door, a yellow cab at the curb, a slam of a door, gone. The revolving door slowed. The yellow cab pulled into traffic, and Dominic Moretti stood at the lobby bar of the Beaumont Hotel with his right hand still around a tumbler of water and a toothpick in it, and did not move. Marcus Webb reached him at a half-run. Nico, what just happened? You look like you saw a ghost. Dominic did not answer. His eyes were on the glass of the revolving door, where the afternoon light was already closing over the spot the cab had left. Footsteps from the other direction, measured, familiar. Boss, Ray Castellano said, arriving at his shoulder. His voice was exactly the same as it had been an hour earlier. Everything all right? The room is ready whenever you are. Dominic turned his head, slowly, and looked at the man who had stood beside him at Mount Auburn Cemetery. He looked at the line of Ray's jaw, The angle of his eyes, the black leather gloves he had never, in 12 years, taken off. The sheen at the edge of his hairline that had not been there 10 minutes ago. Don't trust him. The woman he had buried had whispered 3 sentences into his collar and gone. Dominic's mouth moved into the shape it had learned to hold in rooms where survival depended on not blinking. Go up. I'll be there in 5. Ray nodded and walked toward the elevators. Dominic crossed the lobby without hurry, pushed open the door of the executive restroom, shut it behind him, and pressed his palms flat against the marble counter. His hands were shaking. They had not shaken since the morning they had handed him the clothes she had been wearing that night. He looked at them now in the mirror, a stranger's hands, older than his face, and waited for them to remember how to be still. The child had his eyes. She had Claire's nose. The small dark mole on her left cheek was the one he had kissed on his wedding morning, in a photograph on his desk upstairs, 6 years ago. He was not losing his mind. She was alive. She had a daughter, his daughter, and she had come within arm's length of him after 6 years and had not come home. The answer to that arrived in his chest before his brain formed the words. She had not come home because she could not, because whoever had taken her off that highway in Providence was close enough to him that she had to stay dead to stay breathing. Close enough to his table. He straightened. He ran cold water. He dried his hands on a linen towel. When he walked into the Beaumont salon 4 minutes later, his face was the face the city knew. The meeting ran 90 minutes. Dominic sat at the head of the oval table. Ray sat at his right hand, as he had sat for 6 years. The Beaumont owners, a father and 2 sons, spoke about portfolio valuation and cash flow projections, and none of them noticed a thing. Dominic noticed everything. Ray's collar darkened at the back, though the room was kept at 68 degrees. Ray rubbed the inside of his right wrist 4 times, once every 20 minutes, a tell Dominic had never catalogued because he had never looked for it. On page 11 of the term sheet, Ray read a number aloud as 4.2 million and had to be corrected by the youngest Beaumont son. He had not misread a number in a meeting in the 12 years Dominic had known him. Dominic smiled warmly at the father and sons, shook 3 hands at the end, signed a letter of intent, and said he looked forward to Thursday. In the hallway outside the salon, he caught Marcus by the elbow. Everything you have on Ray Castellano, from the day he walked into the family, financials, travel, surgery records if they exist, and run it out of the study at Beacon Hill, not the office. Marcus looked at him. He had known this man for 20 years. Nico, what's going on? I just saw a ghost, Marcus. Dominic looked past him toward the closing elevator doors where Ray had already disappeared. And I think I finally know who buried her. That night, in the second-floor study of the townhouse on Beacon Hill, Dominic unlocked the safe behind the Rothko and took out the wooden box he had not opened in 4 years. A linen handkerchief embroidered with a looping C. A photograph from the afternoon on the Harvard Bridge. A letter in her handwriting, written the week of their wedding, folded along creases he had worn soft. He sat on the floor with his back against the bookshelf and read the letter by lamplight, as he had read it 1,000 times. And for the first time since the morning of the empty coffin, Dominic Moretti began, quietly, to laugh, not because anything was funny, because she was alive. While Dominic sat on the floor of a Beacon Hill study reading a letter he had worn soft with his fingers, the woman who had written it was 1 mile across the river, locking a hotel room door with both hands. Claire had given the cab driver an address 2 blocks from where she actually meant to stop. Habit. She had paid in cash. She had led Lily a long way around on foot 3 side streets, 1 department store with a second exit on a different avenue. Before walking into the small boutique hotel in Cambridge, she had booked the week before, under the Grace Bennett name. A 3-star place with a painted blue door and 15 rooms. No chain. No corporate reservation system. The kind of place Moretti money never slept in. Up the stairs. 3rd floor. Key in the lock. Inside, she bolted the door, dropped the chain, crossed the room, and drew the curtains. The overhead light stayed off. She switched on the small lamp on the desk. Lily stood in the middle of the rug with Captain under one arm, watching her. "Mom," she said, "are we going home?" "Captain's hungry." Claire came back across the carpet and went down on one knee until her eyes were level with her daughter's. "Lily, I need you to listen to me." The little girl nodded, the way she nodded when her teacher said something important. "I need you to be brave today. We're not going home to Providence tonight." "Is it because the man had a ring like yours?" Claire stopped breathing for half a second. She had not told Lily anything. Not a word about the lobby, not about the man at the bar, not about the ring on his hand. "Honey, what did you say to him?" Lily reported the conversation the way she reported everything, in order, without dropping a detail. The ring. The olive in the glass. The man who had waved his guards back. The question about her mom's name. Lily's answer. Grace. Claire closed her eyes. Dominic would have put it together before the child finished chewing the olive. The face. The mole. The answer that was almost right. He would have known inside 10 seconds. The man at the bar, Claire said carefully, is someone your mom used to love very much, but there is a bad person who tried to hurt us a long time ago, and that bad person stands very close to him, close enough that I can't walk up and say hello. Not yet. Lily considered this. Does the nice man know about the bad one? Not yet. I have to tell him, but I have to do it carefully. Lily nodded once, the matter apparently settled, and sat down on the edge of the bed with Captain in her lap. Claire opened the zippered pocket inside the lining of her coat and took out a small black phone she had bought at a gas station in Pawtucket the week before. Battery in. She dialed the one number stored in it. Elena picked up on the second ring. He saw her, Claire said, and the other one saw me. I need you to come tonight. I need you to take Lily home. There was a silence on the other end, the length of one slow breath. I'm already getting in the car, Elena said. 2 hours, maybe 2.5, from Portsmouth through the dark. Claire set the phone face down on the desk and took a sheet of the hotel's thin writing paper from the drawer. She wrote 4 lines in pen. No greeting, no signature, no address. Tade on Charles Street. 10 tomorrow morning. Come alone. If you still love me the way you used to, don't tell a soul, not even Ray. She folded it into a plain envelope. She went downstairs and stood on the sidewalk until a boy of about 14 came by on a delivery bike. She handed him $40 and an address on Beacon Hill, and told him to put the envelope under the front door and keep riding. No doorbell, no face. The boy pocketed the money and was gone. Across the river, 2 hours later, Dominic Moretti came home to the townhouse through the private rear entrance and found a plain white envelope lying inside the front vestibule on the Persian runner. No name on the front, no return. He recognized the hand before he picked it up. He stood in the dark hallway, the envelope in his fingers, and felt his chest turn over in a way it had not turned over since a morning 6 years earlier when Marcus Webb had called him and told him to sit down. He opened it in the study. He read the 4 lines. He read them again. Then he sat down at the desk with both hands flat on the blotter and did not move for a long time. At the small hotel in Cambridge, Lily had fallen asleep with Captain under her chin. Claire sat beside the window with the lamp off, looking at the half-moon above the rooftops. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. Dominic, she whispered, as if he could hear her across the river. I got this far on my own. Walk me the rest of the way. Across the river, at 10 o'clock that same night, a third person was looking at a reflection and trying to decide how much time he had left. The penthouse on the 30th floor of a glass tower in Back Bay had been a gift from Dominic Moretti 8 years earlier, the year Ray had saved his life at a steakhouse in Atlantic City. The gift had come with a key, a deed, and a line from Dominic about family that Ray had memorized and repeated back at funerals. He stood now in front of the full-length mirror in the master bathroom and unbuttoned his shirt one slow button at a time. The scar ran from the edge of his sternum down along the left side of his ribcage, a thin white line that had faded over the years into something that could almost pass for a surgical mark. A butcher had stitched it in the back of a meat truck in 1996. He had been 22 years old. His name had been Raymond Falcone. The Falcones had on the east side of Providence for a generation before Giancarlo Moretti decided they would not. One night in late October of that year, 6 men with shotguns had walked into a family restaurant called Paolo's and killed every Falcone in the building. Raymond had been in the walk-in freezer, sent down for a case of wine he had not wanted to fetch. He had listened to his father and 2 uncles die, and then, when the shooting stopped and the men began moving through the back, he had climbed into a crate of meat on a delivery truck and ridden it 4 hours into Connecticut under a tarp soaked with beef blood. He had been bleeding from a shotgun pellet that had caught his ribs through the freezer door. The butcher at the other end of the line was an old family friend who had sewn him up on a butcher block and never spoken of it. Raymond Falcone had died in Providence in October of 1996. Raymond Castellano had been born the following spring in a Bronx walk-up, with a Social Security number purchased in cash and a set of Rhode Island dental records that belonged to a boy who had drowned at age 4. It had taken him 30 years, 2 cosmetic surgeries in Montreal, a different hairline, a jaw rebuilt twice, a voice coach in Queens for an entire winter to thin out the Providence in his vowels, a long, slow climb through Bronx errand work and Jersey loan collection until he had positioned himself, 12 years earlier, exactly where he needed to be in the back booth of an Atlantic City steakhouse the night a Moretti boss walked in alone. The shooter he had paid 3 days earlier had missed on purpose. The shot that had clipped Dominic's arm had come from Ray's own gun, fired from a second angle in the confusion. Dominic had remembered the man who had covered him with his body and taken a bullet in the shoulder. Dominic had been grateful. Gratitude had walked Ray into the inner circle. He had waited. He had counted years the way a man in a hospital bed counts ceiling tiles. 6 years ago, Dominic had come back from a doctor's visit with his wife and left the sonogram face up on the desk long enough for Ray to see the image. Claire had been 5 months along. A daughter, the nurse had written in blue pen at the top of the printout. A daughter meant a Moretti bloodline that did not end with Dominic. A son would have meant an heir. A daughter, to a man counting, meant a mother who would one day have a son. Either way, Ray had decided the line could not be allowed to go on. He had called Sal Bianchi on a phone that no longer existed. A mechanic in Somerville had cut the brake line the night before the clinic visit. A driver whose name Ray had never learned had been paid $12,000 to take a black SUV up the left lane of I-95 in the hail. For 6 years, the river had been the answer. The body had never surfaced. The casket had been empty, and the widower had leaned on Ray's shoulder and cried exactly once. Ray buttoned his shirt back up. He crossed to the wet bar and poured 2 fingers of Lagavulin, neat, and carried the glass to the window. Boston lay below him, a grid of amber and white. She had been standing in the lobby of the Beaumont Hotel. She had been holding the hand of a child who was not 5 months along anymore. She had looked straight at his face across 30 feet of marble, and she had not been surprised. 6 years, Ray thought. If she had been alive for 6 years, then she had been looking. He took one long swallow, set the glass down, picked up the small black phone he kept in a wall safe behind a watercolor of Lake Como. He dialed. Sal Bianchi answered on the 3rd ring. "We have a problem," Ray said. "The fox wasn't dead, and she has a kit." A pause on the line. Sal's breath. A lighter clicking. "You sure? Moretti won't believe she's alive without a body in front of him. We're still clean. She saw me. He saw her. He won't sit on it." Another pause. "Then you know what to do," Sal said. "But this time, Raymond, don't leave the roots." Ray hung up. He made a second call. A number that rang into a car parked 2 blocks from the Beaumont. 3 men on retainer, men who had never met Dominic Moretti, and who knew only Ray's face. He gave them a description. A woman, gray knit cap, 5 to 6, dark hair. A girl, 6, navy coat, stuffed cat. Pull the street camera feeds from every block within a mile of the hotel. Find the cab. Trace the ride. After he ended the call, Ray sat down at the desk in his study and opened a laptop he had never connected to the Moretti network. As consigliere, he had the access codes to the organization's internal surveillance system, the camera feeds that covered every property the family owned, including the Beaumont lobby he had chosen for the Tuesday meeting. He uploaded a small script he had written a year before and kept for exactly this kind of evening. The script walked backward through the Beaumont servers and deleted the window of footage between 11:43 and 11:56 that morning. 13 minutes. Gone. He closed the laptop. He did not know that at 8 o'clock that same morning, before any of this had started, Marcus Webb had called the Beaumont's head of security from a private line and ordered an independent backup of the lobby cameras, routed to a server the consigliere had never been told existed. Ray poured a second glass. He drank it slowly. For the first time in 30 years of waiting, his hand was not entirely steady. By 7 the next morning, while Ray Castellano was still sleeping off the second glass of Lagavulin, Elena Vasquez was climbing the narrow stairs of a small hotel in Cambridge with a thermos of coffee under one arm. Claire opened the door before she knocked. They did not speak. Elena set the thermos on the desk and crossed the room and wrapped her arms around Lily, who had been sitting on the edge of the bed in a blue sweater, brushing Captain's one good ear with the corner of a washcloth. Claire knelt down in front of her daughter and put her hand on the soft place at the top of the child's head. "Lily, you're going with Aunt Elena this morning. I'll come get you in a few days. I promise." Lily considered this the way she considered everything, carefully, without drama. "You're going to see the man with the ring like yours," she said. Claire smiled. Her eyes filled. "Yes, baby. I'm going to see your dad." Lily blinked. Once, twice. Her mouth opened a little. "My dad is alive?" Claire pulled her into her arms and pressed her face against the child's hair and held on. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. Your dad is a good man, but there's something very complicated I have to fix before you two can meet properly. Do you trust me?" Lily nodded against her shoulder. Then she leaned back and put Captain into Claire's hands. "Take him with you," she said. "Captain keeps people safe. Claire closed her fingers around the stuffed cat and found she could not speak for a full 5 seconds. Elena eased an arm around the little girl and moved her toward the door. A black SUV was idling in the alley behind the hotel. A friend of Elena's cousin at the wheel. Within 10 minutes they were across the river. And by the time the sun was fully up, they were on I-93, heading north. At 9:45, Claire walked into Tata Bakery and Cafe on Charles Street. It was the kind of place that did not feel like a place where the world ended or began. Marble counters, white tile, women in overcoats ordering croissants and flat whites. She took the corner table farthest from the front window, sat with her back to the wall, and kept her eyes on the door. Heavy wool coat, dark scarf pulled high across her jaw, gray knit cap, a cup of black tea that she did not drink. Captain sat on her lap under the table. At 9:58, the door opened and Dominic Moretti walked in alone. He was not wearing a suit, a plain black wool coat, a dark gray turtleneck, no gloves, no sunglasses. He looked, for a moment, like the man who had once taken her walking across the Harvard Bridge at sunrise before either of them could afford a car. He saw her at the corner table. He stopped in the doorway for 3 full seconds, long enough that the couple behind him had to step around. Then he crossed the room. He sat down across from her. He did not take off his coat. Neither of them spoke for 20 seconds. Her hand stayed around the teacup. His stayed flat on the table, the platinum band catching the light from the window. "Claire," he said finally. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "I'm sorry," she said. He shook his head. "No, don't, tell me." From the start, she told him. She told it fast, the way she had rehearsed for 6 years in the silence of her kitchen, because she had always known that if she ever got to say it out loud, she would have a limited amount of time before her chest closed up. The brake pedal that had gone soft. The SUV that had come even in the left lane. The water. Elena. The decision she had made on a riverbank before the sirens came. The 4 months in an upstairs bedroom in Portsmouth. The birth. The new name. Providence. The library. The notebook. 47 names. A retired reporter named Harold Finch. A Delaware shell company that traced back to the Bianchi family after 4 layers of paperwork. And yesterday, she said, I saw him. I saw his eyes. I have never forgotten those eyes. Ray Castellano was the man behind the wheel of that SUV. Dominic did not move. Only his right hand, the one that wore the Orion ring. It closed, once, around itself. "I couldn't come to you," Claire said. "I didn't know which of them it was. I didn't know who in your house had told them where I would be. If I came up out of hiding with a daughter and I was wrong, we were dead. Both of us. So I worked. And in 6 years I still didn't have enough to put him in the ground." Dominic looked at her for a long moment. The muscles along his jaw moved once. "Now you have me," he said. "And I have enough." He paused. The winter light came sideways across the table between them. 6 years, Claire." "I know," she said. "I counted every one of them. Between the table in the back of Tate and the sedan parked across the street. A second clock was running, and neither of them knew it yet." Claire had taken a small notebook out of her inside coat pocket. She did not open it. She only rested her fingers on the leather cover, the way another woman might rest them on a Bible. "The SUV that came even with me," she said. Harold traced the plate. It had been repainted. The VIN was cold stamped, but it came out of a Delaware shell that runs back to a trucking fleet Sal Bianchi's cousin operates in East Boston. "We have the car. What we don't have is the hand on the wheel. Nothing on paper ties Ray to that vehicle." Dominic nodded once. "I have the other half." He looked down at the teacup between her hands, then back up. "The brake line was cut on the night of March 12th. You went into the water on the 14th, which means a mechanic was in our garage within 48 hours of a single piece of news that you were 5 months along, and that the baby was a girl." Claire lifted her head. "4 people knew that," Dominic said. "You, me, the doctor in Providence, and Ray." Claire was very still. He came into the office to drop a folder at the wrong moment. "I was still on the phone with you." I shouted something. I don't even remember what. He turned around and went back out. I thought he was being discreet. "He was being patient," Claire said. "Yes." They sat with it for a few seconds. Outside on Charles Street, a delivery truck beeped as it reversed. "He's the bridge," Dominic said. "He's the only person in my house who had the thread to Bianchi and the information to hand them. Everything since that night, every deal, every introduction, every time he steered me toward a room, we have to assume it was walking us somewhere. Then we don't chase him today," Claire said. "No, we don't." He leaned forward. His voice did not rise. The quieter it got, the more she recognized him. Here's how we do it. I go back to the office this afternoon. I take the meeting he's set up for Thursday. I laugh at the same jokes. I put my hand on his shoulder once, the way I always do. He never sees a flinch. In the meantime, Marcus runs a full file on him out of the study at Beacon Hill, and Tommy Russo puts eyes on him 24 hours a day. I want every call, every account, every flight manifest with a Castellano on it going back 12 years. That's your side. Your side, he said, is the Bianchi side. You have a reporter and a network and something I don't have, which is 6 years of distance. I want the money trail between Ray and Sal. Calls, wires, anything that puts the two of them in the same sentence on paper. He took a pen from his pocket and a folded piece of hotel stationery from the inside of his coat. He wrote 4 lines in block letters. An address in the South End. 4 digits. A single code word. This is a building I bought 4 years ago under a company Ray has never seen on any ledger. Top floor. Steel door. Camera on every approach. Go there now. I'll come to you tonight. Claire folded the paper twice and slid it into the same inner pocket as the notebook. And Lily? Elena has her. Keep her where she is. Ray doesn't know about New Hampshire. We don't move the child. Not until he's neutralized. He paused. He looked at her for a moment across the small table as if he were memorizing her face again. Claire, I need you to hear me. Part of me wants to walk into the 34th floor at 2 o'clock this afternoon and put a bullet through his eye. I know. But you taught me patience 6 years ago. I'm going to do it right this time. Paper. Witnesses. Enough that when he falls, there is nowhere he can crawl to. Claire's hand moved across the table and rested over his. I don't want it in blood if we can help it. I want him alive long enough to know he lost. Dominic looked down at her hand on his. He laughed. Once. Low in his chest. It was the first laugh in 6 years that did not have ash in it. Across the street, in a gray sedan parked half a block down, a man in a navy baseball cap adjusted the zoom on his phone and took a photograph through the cafe window. He had followed Dominic Moretti from the rear entrance of the townhouse on Beacon Hill at 9:22 that morning. He had watched his boss walk into the cafe alone, already unusual, and sit down with a woman in a gray knit cap who had been waiting in the corner. He did not recognize her face, but he had been told, 6 hours earlier, to photograph anyone Dominic met in private today. He sent the image, encrypted, to a number he knew only as R. In the penthouse in Back Bay, Ray Castellano opened the photograph on a tablet that never touched a network and expanded it with his thumb and forefinger. The gray hat, the set of the mouth, the eyes. His face went the color of old paper. He dialed. Stay on them, he said. When she leaves the cafe without him, take the car. Bring her to the warehouse on the west side waterfront, alive. I need to know where the child is. At 11 o'clock, the order Ray had given into an encrypted line was already in motion, and Claire walked out of Tate onto Charles Street 5 minutes ahead of her husband. It had been their agreement not to leave together. 1 door, 2 exits. She pulled the gray knit cap lower, tucked Captain into the crook of her arm beneath her coat, and turned north toward the bus stop 2 blocks up. She would ride 1 stop, walk back through the edge of Boston Common, hail a cab on Tremont, and arrive at the South End building by a route no one would think to plot. It was a good plan. It lasted 90 seconds. Tommy Russo had been standing in the doorway of a dry cleaner across the street since 9:45 that morning, reading the same newspaper twice. He was 28 years old, wiry, the fastest shooter Dominic kept in his close rotation. When Claire came out of the cafe and turned north, he folded the paper, dropped it in a trash can, and fell in behind her at 50 meters. A white panel van that had been idling in front of a fire hydrant 3 cars back pulled forward fast and braked hard against the curb 20 feet ahead of her. 2 men in work jackets jumped out of the side door. Tommy had his hand inside his coat before his brain finished the sentence. Claire, he shouted. Run! She turned toward his voice for a single instant, saw the van, saw the men moving, and ran the other way, across the sidewalk, between 2 parked cars, into the thin morning crowd on the edge of Boston Common, where a dozen tourists were photographing the swan boats. The first gunshot cracked off brick behind her. Tommy fired twice from a low crouch. The nearer of the 2 men dropped hard on the sidewalk, guns skidding into the gutter. The second man pivoted and returned fire. Something hot and bright punched Tommy in the left shoulder and spun him halfway around, but he stayed on his feet. Inside Tate, Dominic was already moving before his chair finished tipping back. He came out the front door with his right hand inside his coat and the safety already thumbed off. The noise of the cafe behind him dimmed into white. The second gunman had abandoned the van and was running hard after Claire, gaining, weaving through a clutch of women with strollers who were screaming and trying to get down. Claire reached the low granite steps of Brewer Fountain at a dead sprint. She missed the second step. Her ankle turned. She went down onto her knees on the wet pavement, Captain rolling out of her coat and coming to rest against the base of the fountain. And the second man's hand closed around her wrist before she could rise. Dominic came around the edge of the hedge at the same moment. He did not stop moving. He did not speak. One shot. The second man dropped forward onto Claire's hip and did not move again. She scrambled out from under the weight, breath sawing in her chest. Dominic reached her, lifted her, held her by both shoulders for a second, scanning her face, her arms, her torso. Are you hit? No. Sirens. Already. Somewhere on Tremont. Tommy came up the path from the Charles Street side, one hand pressed against his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. He took one look at the bodies, at his boss, at the woman. Scene, Dominic said. Handle it. Call Marcus. Tommy was already on his phone. At the far end of the park, where Boylston curves around, a black armored SUV slid quietly into a legal spot along the curb. Marcus Webb had been parked there since 10:50 at Dominic's instruction. A thermos of black coffee on the passenger seat, a spare pistol under the driver's thigh, a hospital contact's phone number on speed dial. Dominic walked Claire across the common with his coat around her shoulders and Captain back in her hand. Marcus opened the rear door from the driver's seat without turning around. Dominic put her in, climbed in beside her, and shut the door. The SUV pulled into traffic just as the first cruiser turned onto Beacon. In the back seat, Claire began to shake. They know where I am. They know I'm alive. Ray moved, Dominic said. His voice was very level. He panicked. That's what we wanted. From the front seat, Marcus finally turned and looked over his shoulder at the woman behind him. For 6 years, he had been the man who had closed the estate paperwork. The man who had sat with Dominic on the kitchen floor the night after the funeral and refilled the glass 4 times. He looked at her now and his mouth opened once and nothing came out. Jesus Christ. Claire, he said at last. We buried you. I'm sorry, Marcus. Her voice caught. I know I owe you an explanation. He took his glasses off. He was crying, quietly, without wiping it. Nico hasn't been Nico since that night. You're back. Whatever the reason, I don't need to hear it. I'm just glad. The SUV climbed into the south end 20 minutes later and pulled into a reserved bay under a pre-war brownstone on Warren Avenue. Steel door, keypad, a service elevator that required 2 separate codes. Upstairs, on the top floor, the apartment was unfurnished in the way that safe apartments always were. A long, gray sofa, a table, a kitchen stocked with staples, cameras in 3 corners of every room, and a pressure-fit panel under the master bedroom floorboards that hid a small locker of handguns and a medical kit. Marcus stayed downstairs, already on the phone to a nurse he trusted who would be at the service entrance within the hour to put stitches in Tommy's shoulder. Dominic brought Claire inside. He locked the door. He led her to the sofa and sat down beside her. For the first time in 6 years, he took her hand in his. You're safe, he said. From this minute on, you don't leave my sight. Claire set her head down on his shoulder. She did not cry loudly. She only let the tears come, one after another, without sound, into the black wool of his coat. 6 years of silence, finally breaking. The call Ray Castellano had been waiting for came at 11:43. It did not come the way he had ordered. The voice on the other end belonged to one of the 2 drivers he had left in a second car 3 blocks north of Charles Street, a man paid to watch and to call only if something went wrong. Something had gone wrong. Both down on the common, cops on scene. Moretti came out the front of the cafe with a piece. Tommy Russo, too. She's in an SUV I've never seen before. We lost the plate in traffic. Ray stood very still at the window of the penthouse for perhaps 5 seconds. Then he said, without inflection, "Time's up." He ended the call. He understood, in the way a man understands the temperature of a room, what the last hour had told him. Dominic Moretti had been at Charles Street at 11 on a Tuesday morning. Dominic had come out of a cafe at a dead run with his gun already out. Dominic had killed the second man himself, which meant Dominic had met with Claire, which meant Dominic had, at some point between 7 o'clock last night and 11 this morning, chosen a side that was not his consigliaries. Ray crossed the penthouse to the wall, safe behind the Lake Como watercolor, and opened it. The first passport was American. Second was Italian. The third was Canadian, in the name of a real estate agent from Halifax who had died of pneumonia in 2019, and whose identity Ray had quietly maintained ever since. He took the Canadian. He took a rubber-banded stack of $100 bills, 4 inches thick. He took an external hard drive the size of a deck of cards that contained every piece of Moretti organizational information he had been able to copy over 12 years. He did not take anything with a GPS chip. He dialed Sal Bianchi from a phone he had never used before and would destroy within the hour. "I'm burned," he said. "I need to cross tonight. I'm bringing everything. Financial routes, the BPD list, the harbor network, everything." A long silence on Sal's end. The sound of a match being lit. "You were a big investment, Raymond," Sal said finally. "But right now you're a liability. Moretti's consigliere on the run is a man every wise guy from here to Philadelphia will try to kill for credit." Ray waited. He knew Sal. He waited him out. "Give me a reason," Sal said. Ray let 2 seconds pass. "I know where Moretti's daughter is." He did not know. Not yet. But the man he had put on Dominic since the early hours of that morning had called in at 8, with a small piece of information he had not yet understood the value of. A woman in a gray cap had handed a little girl off to a dark-haired woman at the side door of a small hotel in Cambridge just after dawn. Elena Vasquez was already a name inside a file on Ray's hard drive. He would find the child by midnight. Another pause. "Bring me the child," Sal said, "and you have a seat at the Bianchi table for the rest of your life." Ray killed the call. He snapped the phone in half against the marble counter, dropped both halves into a sink full of bleach, and walked out of the penthouse without looking back. At 11 that night, Dominic Moretti stood at the head of a long table on the 20th floor of Moretti Holdings, with Marcus Webb on his left and Tommy Russo on his right. Tommy's left arm was in a clean white sling. He was pale but upright. "Ray is gone," Dominic said. "The penthouse is cleared out. The safe is open. He's running." Tommy lifted his chin. "We chase?" "No, not yet. He's running to Bianchi. It's the only roof he has. Sal will use him. They'll come at us inside a week. We prepare for war." Marcus took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Nico, if this turns into a war, Claire and Lily are the first 2 names on the target list. He knows where you're soft. I know." Dominic turned toward the glass wall and the lights of the city below. "Elena is already driving Lily north. Not back to Portsmouth. A cabin I own in Vermont under a dead uncle's name. No one in the organization knows that address. Not Marcus. Not Tommy. Not even Claire. If they take Claire, they can't break out of her what she does not know." He walked back to the door of the private conference room where Claire had been waiting with a cup of coffee she had not touched. He told her. She listened all the way through. Her hands did not move on the cup. "I want to see her before you move her," Claire said. "I can't, love. You and Lily in one place is exactly what Ray wants. He wants both of you in one room. We have to stay split until he's down." She closed her eyes. She nodded. Marcus came into the room with a secure handset and set it on the table. Claire dialed the number Elena had given her that morning. A small square face filled the screen, cheeks flushed from the cold of a long drive. Captain's absence held in the frame by the child's one-armed grip on a plaid blanket. "Mom," Lily said immediately. "Did you see him?" "I did, baby. He's sitting right here." Claire turned the phone. For the first time in his life, Dominic Moretti looked at his daughter's face. He opened his mouth and closed it. "Hi," he managed. "Lily, I'm Dominic. I know you," she said, very matter of fact. "Mom keeps your picture in the wooden box in her closet. Are you okay?" He laughed once. His eyes filled. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm okay because I'm looking at you." 2 days after the video call with Lily, Boston stopped pretending. At 3:17 on a Thursday morning, a propane canister and 90 seconds of det cord brought down the front wall of a Moretti-owned cold storage warehouse on the East Boston waterfront. 3 men on the overnight dock crew were killed before the sprinklers could cycle. By 9 that same morning, a Bianchi-owned restaurant on Hanover Street in the North End lost 5 men to a single-shooter walk-in that emptied a magazine before leaving through the kitchen. The shooter was never identified in any report that saw daylight. The Boston Police Department, by late afternoon, had issued a 2-sentence statement that mentioned an ongoing investigation and declined to connect the 2 events. 3 captains in the district had been on Moretti retainer for over a decade. 2 had been on Bianchi's. None of them planned to step into the middle. 40 miles west, in the Chelmsford field office of the FBI, a second-year special agent named Sarah Chen pulled the warehouse report off the wire and opened a new case file at 5:05. At Moretti Holdings, Dominic moved everything that could be moved into defensive posture. The 34th floor office was closed to outside traffic. The lobby doors were locked to anyone without a badge. 2 shooters sat in the parking garage at all times. The cargo fleet was pulled off the water and parked. Tommy Russo, arm still in its sling, ran the floor. In the apartment in the South End, Claire kept working. She asked Dominic, on the second morning of the war, if she could bring Harold Finch into the building. He looked at her for a moment. You have a reporter, he said. I have a reporter. Dominic almost smiled. Bring him. Harold Finch arrived at 3 that afternoon, 70 years old, a wool scarf around his neck, a leather portfolio under his arm. He had written about the Moretti family in the Providence Journal for 3 decades, and had never, in all those years, been inside a Moretti room. Dominic shook his hand at the steel door and meant it. They sat at the kitchen table. Harold opened the portfolio. Your consigliere, he said, isn't named Castellano. He's never been named Castellano. Dominic did not move. Harold laid a photograph on the table. A group shot from 1995. A family dinner at a restaurant called Paolo's in Providence. The Falcones, Harold said. Giancarlo Moretti wiped them out in October of '96 over a shipping disagreement that was really a heroin pipeline. The youngest son was listed among the dead. There was no body. Raymond Falcone. He would be 52 now. And if you compare the bone structure in the jaw and the orbital ridge against the man who has been standing at your right shoulder for 12 years, allowing for 2 rounds of cosmetic work in Montreal, he did not need to finish. Dominic looked at the photograph for a long time. His face did not change. He sat at my table for 12 years, he said quietly. He married my sister. Claire, who had been pouring coffee, stopped with the pot in the air. Sophia? Ray married Sophia? 3 years ago. They have a 2-year-old son. That is how deep he went. Does she know? She does not. I have to tell her. I can't leave her and the boy another night under the same roof as his things. He reached for the house phone on the wall and dialed his sister's number from memory. Sophia picked up on the second ring. He spoke for 90 seconds. He did not explain. He told her to take the baby in the nursery bag and drive now to an address he named only once, and to trust him the way she had trusted him when they were children. She did not ask. She went. Harold laid a second folder on the table. Bank statements. Cayman Islands. A corporate shell out of Grand Cayman registered to a law firm in Zurich. 14 wire transfers over 6 years, from an account traceable by 2 more layers of paperwork to a Bianchi holding company. $4.2 million, total. That's paper, Harold said. That's enough to walk him out in front of the old families and have him handled in the old way. Except he isn't inside any of our walls anymore, Dominic said. He ran to Sal 2 nights ago. Then you pull him back out. Claire sat down at the table. What does pulling him out look like? Dominic looked at Harold. Harold looked at Dominic. He has to kill you himself, Dominic said to Claire. He has to. Sal won't shelter him for long otherwise. Sal will need proof. And proof means Ray's own hand. If we put you somewhere he thinks he can reach you, he will come for you personally, and then we have him. Bait, Claire said. I'm not putting you on that table. I've been on that table for 6 years, Nico. She held his eyes. I want to be the one who closes it. With my own 2 hands. The trap was Marcus Webb's design, and he built it on paper over the next 36 hours while the East Boston warehouse was still smoking. The leak went out on Thursday evening through a mid-level driver in the Moretti Transport Division. A man named Delaney, whom Marcus had identified 8 months earlier as being on a quiet Bianchi retainer. Delaney did not know he had been identified. Marcus let him overhear a phone call, one side only, in which Dominic was heard arranging for Claire to meet a federal prosecutor at Rialto, a small, high-ceilinged restaurant in Cambridge, at 8:30 Friday night. Sworn affidavit, recorded testimony, everything that would put Raymond Castellano in a federal holding cell for the rest of his life. Delaney made his phone call inside 90 minutes. Sal Bianchi had the information by midnight. The truth, laid out in a locked conference room on the 20th floor of Moretti Holdings, was simpler. Rialto's owner, a man named Peter Halloran, had been married to Dominic's cousin for 15 years. Peter would close the restaurant at 7 Friday evening, citing food poisoning among the Thursday dinner crowd, and refund every reservation. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen, who had met Dominic in a parking garage off Route 2 20 hours earlier, and had walked out with a handshake and a partial list of Bianchi accounts, agreed to overwatch from the parking structure across the street. Claire would not be at Rialto. A junior agent named Rivera, 5'5", dark hair, same build, would sit at the back table in Claire's coat and Claire's gray cap, back to the door, a menu open in front of her. Friday evening. At 7:40, Dominic sat at a console in the 20th floor operations room of Moretti Holdings, a ring of 8 monitors in front of him. Claire sat beside him in a charcoal sweater, her hand on his forearm. Tommy Russo manned the door. On a separate feed, Sarah Chen's team was wired into 3 street cameras outside the restaurant. At 8:15, a black SUV with smoked plates pulled to the curb in front of Rialto. 4 men stepped out onto the sidewalk. One of them was Ray Castellano. On the console, Dominic leaned forward a quarter inch. "He came himself," he said. "He doesn't trust anyone else to kill her." Ray walked in through the front door with his 3 Bianchi men behind him. The hostess stand was empty. The lights at the back of the room had been dimmed. At the corner table, a woman in a gray knit cap sat with her back to the door. Ray crossed the dining room without hurry. He drew a pistol from his right coat pocket 6 feet from the table. Agent Rivera turned her head. Her face was not Claire's. From the kitchen doors, from the hallway to the wine cellar, from 2 skylights in the ceiling, FBI tactical came through at the same second. Ceiling ropes, flash, voices shouting. Ray was already moving. His second gun came out of his left pocket in one motion. He did not fire at the agents. He fired into the air above his 3 Bianchi men and shouted a word in Italian, and the 3 of them opened up in a panic spray that put 2 agents on the floor and shattered the wine glasses along the bar. In the 90 seconds of chaos that followed, Ray went down the back hall, through the pantry, and down the narrow service stair to the cellar. There was a delivery door beneath street level that led out onto an alley behind Brattle Street. He went through it at a run. A Lincoln with the engine running was waiting in a loading bay 2 buildings over. He was in the passenger seat before the FBI secured the main dining room. 3 Bianchi men died in the restaurant. 2 agents were hit. The trap closed on the wrong cup, and across the river, at the same moment, the worst half of the night was already happening. Sal Bianchi had listened to his consigliere's call and his son's and had come to a colder conclusion than Ray had. A prosecutor meeting at Rialto meant Claire Moretti had to be somewhere nearby. Hotels on the river were too public. Moretti-safe properties in the South End were almost certainly where Dominic had parked her, while the attention was elsewhere. He had sent a second team. At the brownstone on Warren Avenue, Marcus Webb sat at the kitchen table across from Claire, a cup of coffee and a loaded Glock 19 at his right hand. Dominic had ordered Marcus personally onto the door the moment Claire had refused to be separated from the building. Marcus was 62 years old and had not fired a weapon outside a range in 4 years. The fire alarm did not sound when the steel door blew. 4 men came through the doorway inside 7 seconds of the charge detonating. Marcus turned the kitchen table on its side and fired twice from behind it. Claire dropped to the floor, drew a small revolver from the panel under the counter, and put the first man down with a shot under the jaw. The second man shot Marcus through the belly. Marcus went down onto one knee against the overturned table, the Glock still in his hand, and fired twice more as he fell. A hand closed on the back of Claire's sweater and pulled her off the floor. Tape across her mouth. Her wrists wrenched behind her. They dragged her out of the apartment between 2 of them, while the 4th crouched beside Marcus to confirm the wound and judged, wrongly, that the man on the floor was already finished. Marcus lay on his side against a pool of his own blood that was spreading across the hardwood. He found the phone in his coat pocket with his offhand and pressed the speed dial with his thumb. Dominic picked up on the first ring. Nico Marcus's voice came out as a wet rasp. "They took her. Bianchi. Southie. Warehouse." The phone slid out of his hand onto the floor. In the operations room on the 20th floor, Marcus Webb's last sentence came through the speaker, and the microphone in Dominic Moretti's hand dropped onto the console and skittered across the surface before he caught it. For 1 second, the man in the chair was not the Winter King. He was Nico, 37 years old, sitting in front of 8 monitors with an earpiece full of static, and he had just buried his wife for the 2nd time in 1 week. Then the second ended. He stood up. His voice did not rise. Tommy Russo was already in the doorway, his sling abandoned on a chair, a fresh magazine in his good hand. "Call the whole bench. Every shooter on payroll. Every retired operator we keep on retainer. I don't care if they're asleep or drunk. I want 20 men in the garage at 1 a.m. We go into the Southie waterfront at 2. Tommy was on the phone before the order finished. Dominic picked up a second handset and dialed Elena in Vermont. "Move her," he said. "Right now. Not back to the cabin. The 3rd location. The one I told you about last spring." Elena did not ask a question. She said, "I'm putting her in the car. Don't tell me where you're going. I don't want to know until the night is over." A pause. "Nico." "Yes, Dominic. She's going to be all right. She's the strongest person I've ever known." He closed his eyes for 1 second. "Drive carefully," he said, and hung up. He did not cry. He did not sit back down. He began to work. 20 minutes later, the service elevator of Moretti Holdings opened, and Special Agent Sarah Chen walked in alone. Her tactical coat was unzipped. She had driven across the bridge herself. "I heard about your lawyer. He's on his way to Mass General," Dominic said. "He's breathing. I can move federal teams tonight," she said. But I need something from you, Mr. Moretti. When your wife is back and Castellano is in custody, you are going to sit down across from me in a federal building, and you are going to hand me Salvatore Bianchi. Every account, every doc, every captain. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. In the monitors behind him, the satellite view of the Southie waterfront was cycling through 6 different angles. I am done with the Empire. I just want my wife. Sarah nodded once. You have the FBI behind you. Across the harbor, in a cold, cavernous warehouse on the South Boston waterfront, Claire Moretti opened her eyes. Her wrists were bound with plastic flex ties to the arms of a metal chair. The back of her head throbbed under a crust of dried blood along her temple. A fluorescent bank hung high above her on a steel truss. Containers were stacked 4 high along the far wall. She counted, slowly, without moving her head, 8 men in dark jackets standing at intervals around the floor. Maybe 10, at least 2 at each exit. A man in a black cashmere overcoat stepped into the pool of light in front of her. 58, silver hair swept back. The kind of tan a man kept in February only by flying somewhere for it. Mrs. Moretti. Sal Bianchi smiled, the smile of a man who had waited patiently a long time. 6 years. We thought you had the good manners to drown. Turns out you can swim. Claire did not answer. Simple question, Sal said. Where is the child? I don't know. You don't know where your own daughter is. That is exactly right. I knew a day would come when a man like you would ask me that question. I made sure I didn't know, so I couldn't tell. Sal studied her a moment. Then he laughed, short and unoffended. Clever, he said, but we have time. From the dark behind him, another man stepped into the light. Claire turned her head a fraction and looked Raymond Falcone directly in the face. Raymond Falcone, she said. Finally, you have to look at me without a windshield in between. The air in the room changed. No one had said that name, out loud to his face in 30 years. Ray's voice, when it came, was flat and low. You've known a long time. 6 years, Raymond. I have your list. I have your Cayman accounts. I have your real date of birth and your mother's maiden name. Did you think I spent 6 years not working? Ray's hand went to his waistband and came back up with a pistol. He closed the distance in one step and pressed the muzzle against the center of her forehead. Enough. Sal's hand closed around Ray's wrist before the trigger traveled a millimeter. Wait, Sal said softly. The child first, then her. At 2 in the morning, the Southie waterfront lay dark and salt-damp under a low ceiling of cloud, and 30 armed men were already in position around a warehouse marked with a faded Bianchi cold chain logo. 18 of them belonged to Dominic Moretti, 12 belonged to the FBI. Dominic stood in the shadow of a loading crane on the north side of the building, a black plate carrier over his coat and an earpiece in his right ear. Tommy Russo had refused to remain in the staging van. His left arm hung useless at his side. His right held a compact pistol with the ease of long practice. I'm on your 6, he said quietly into his mic. Someone has to keep you alive tonight. Sarah Chen's voice came through on the FBI channel. Perimeter tight. Waterside covered. We are on your signal. The plan was Dominic's. Team 1 would stage a noisy diversion at the main roll-up door on the east face. Team 2, 2 blocks south, would cut the power feed to the warehouse grid. Dominic and Tommy would drop in from the roof through a skylight he had memorized from 3 years of cargo records, onto the mezzanine above the main floor. At 2:16, a pickup truck without lights barreled into the chain-link gate, and 2 men opened fire on the east face. At 2:17, the warehouse went dark. Inside, the fluorescent banks above Claire Moretti cut out one by one. The silence of the sudden dark lasted a full second. Then the air split with shouts in Italian, boots moving on concrete, the first rattle of automatic fire aimed at nothing. Flashlights came on at random angles. Claire did what she had been preparing herself to do for 40 minutes. She rocked her weight forward, planted her bound feet, and drove the chair over sideways against the concrete. The impact broke the plastic tie on her left wrist. She rolled once, fast, across the oil-stained floor and into the cover of the nearest container stack. Above her, on the steel mezzanine catwalk, Sal Bianchi was already moving. He grabbed Ray by the elbow and pulled him toward a ladder that led up to an office box bolted against the north wall. Dominic came down from the roof on a fast rope 15 seconds later, boots hitting concrete in the dark 6 feet from the chair Claire had just rolled out of. The chair was empty. His heart made one hard stroke against his ribs. Then her voice, low, from the shadow of the containers. Nico, here. He was at her side in 3 strides, a tactical knife out of his belt, the remaining ties parted under his blade. Go out the north door, he whispered. Chen's team is holding it. Ray. He's on the mezzanine. Sal too. I'll handle him. Get out. I'm going with you. He stopped for 1/2 second and looked at her in the dark. There was no time to argue. There was no time. And they both knew it. Behind me. Always. He put a small pistol into her hand and pressed something else into her palm at the same time, a folding blade. Still closed. She closed her fingers around it without looking. They went up the iron staircase 2 steps at a time. On the mezzanine, Sal was crouched behind a steel drum, blood on his cashmere shoulder from a ricochet that had caught him coming up the ladder. He fired twice around the edge. Dominic returned a single round that struck the drum 6 inches from Sal's ear, and then a second that found the meat of Sal's upper arm. The old boss went down hard on his side and did not get back up. Ray stepped out from behind the office box at the same moment, from behind Claire. Her head turned a 1/4 second too late. Ray's pistol came up against the line of her jaw. Put it down, Dominic. His voice was tight, or she dies for real this time. Dominic froze on the metal grating. His gun lowered 1 inch. 2. He opened his hand and let it clatter onto the catwalk. Ray did not shoot. He wanted to speak. That was the mistake Claire had been counting on. 30 years, Moretti, he said. His voice was thinner than it had ever been. 30 years I watched your father and you and your family eat at long tables while my mother and my father rotted under the floor of a place in Providence that doesn't even exist anymore. Every year I sat at your table and smiled and raised a glass. I've been waiting for this minute. You killed my wife the first time, Dominic said, his eyes on Ray's, his right hand still raised. You will not kill her a second. She dies. Your child dies. Then you. That is justice. While he spoke, Claire's right hand, the one he could not see behind the curve of her own hip, moved. The folding knife opened in her palm with the soft sound of a single click. She drove it backward and down in one short, vicious motion into the muscle of Ray's thigh. Ray screamed. His gun jerked. The shot went 3 inches wide, and the bullet tore across the top of Claire's ear, but did not find bone. Dominic was already moving. He hit Ray at shoulder height and took him off his feet. The two of them went down onto the grating in a crash of metal. Ray's pistol skittered away into the dark below. Dominic was heavier by 30 pounds, and angrier by 30 years of his own. He drove a knee into Ray's sternum, pinned the consigliere's right wrist against the steel, and brought his own recovered pistol down until the muzzle rested flat against Raymond Falcone's forehead. His finger found the trigger. Claire came up onto the catwalk beside him, breathing hard, blood on the side of her face. Dominic, not like this. He did not look at her. His hand was shaking for the first time in 20 years. He lives, she said, quiet and steady. He lives in a federal cell. He watches his own son grow up knowing what his father was. That is a heavier sentence than what you have in your hand. Dominic breathed in, breathed out. He looked at her. He nodded. He lifted the pistol 3 inches and brought the butt of it down hard against Ray's temple. Once. The consigliere went slack. For you, Dominic said quietly to the unconscious man beneath him, and for Sophia. By 3 a.m, the Southie waterfront belonged to the FBI. Sal Bianchi was taken out of the warehouse on a stretcher with a field dressing around his shoulder and a pair of handcuffs hooked through the side rail. The wound would not kill him. A federal grand jury. His lawyer would soon find out. Almost certainly would bury him long before any wound could. Raymond Falcone came out on his feet, wrists bound behind his back, a thin line of blood drying at his temple where the butt of Dominic's pistol had struck him. Sarah Chen read him his rights as he regained full consciousness in the back of a federal van, and repeated them a second time so that the body camera on her lapel would pick up every word. 11 Bianchi men had died inside the warehouse. 3 of Dominic's had fallen on the stairs on the main floor. 1 FBI agent, a 31-year-old father of 2 named Patrick Hale, had been killed on the catwalk by a round meant for Tommy Russo. Across the river, at Massachusetts General, Marcus Webb came out of 7 hours of surgery at 5:40 in the morning, with 2 feet of intestine removed and a prognosis that used the words expected full recovery and 90 days. The surgeon told Tommy in the corridor that if the bullet had traveled 2 centimeters to the left, they would have been having a different conversation. Claire and Dominic sat in the back of an idling ambulance outside the warehouse. Neither of them was hurt badly enough to be transported. Claire had a shallow graze across the top of her right ear, where Ray's shot had passed, and a bruise the size of a plum on her left temple, where she had been struck unconscious 3 hours before. Dominic dipped the corner of a gauze pad into a bottle of saline and worked the dried blood off her skin slowly, with the patience of a man who had not been allowed to do anything for her in 6 years. "Is it over?" she asked. "It's starting," he said. "Sal will stand trial. Ray will stand trial. The Bureau will want me on the stand for both. and I gave Agent Chen my word. I'm cooperating. You're going to give up the organization. I'm going to dismantle what I can. The cargo lines, the legitimate holdings. Those stay and they become Moretti Global Logistics and nothing else. The parts that can't be cleaned, I hand off to older families who will run them without my name. I won't be a boss, Claire. I'll be your husband. And Lily's father. You're sure? He lifted her chin with the edge of one knuckle so she would look at him. 6 years ago, I didn't have a choice. Now I do. And I choose you. At 7, the sun came up over Boston Harbor in the color of old brass, and a plain gray FBI sedan left the waterfront with Dominic at the wheel and Claire in the passenger seat. They drove north on I-93 for 4 hours. He told her things on the drive that he had not said aloud in 6 years. He had never been with another woman. He had gone to her grave every Saturday morning at 8, with or without flowers, and sat on the bench across from the headstone for an hour. He had kept running the organization because stopping would have meant letting her truly be gone. Every morning, between waking and stepping into his shoes, he had turned the Orion ring 3 times on his finger, a habit that had begun on the first night of their honeymoon and never broken. She told him things too. The night of Lily's birth, it had been Elena's hand she had squeezed in place of his. The first time Lily had said the word mama had been on a kitchen floor in Portsmouth, holding a wooden spoon. Lily had asked about her father at the age of 4, and Claire had told her he was a good man who had gone to heaven before she was born. Every night since Lily turned 2, Claire had read her one page of a child's book of constellations. She had wanted Lily to know Orion by heart, so that when the day came that his name could finally be spoken, her daughter would already recognize the shape of it. At noon, they turned off a narrow road in rural Vermont onto a long gravel drive that curved through a stand of pine. A wooden cabin stood at the end of the drive, smoke rising from its stone chimney. Elena opened the door before Dominic could kill the engine. She came down the porch steps and wrapped her arms around Claire without a word. Then she looked over Claire's shoulder at Dominic and gave him a single, measured nod, the nod of a woman who had been carrying a judgment for 6 years and had just chosen to set it down. A child-sized shape appeared in the doorway behind Elena. Lily crossed the porch in her socks. She stopped 3 feet from Dominic on the frosted grass. She looked at his right hand. She looked at his face. Then she turned toward Claire. Mom, is Dad really home? Claire's voice caught. Yes, baby. He's home. Lily turned back. She did not rush into his arms. She tipped her head to one side instead, the way she did when she was working something out. Do you know how to hug? She asked, very seriously. Mom said you haven't been with me for a lot of years. You might have forgotten. Dominic went down onto one knee on the cold grass. His eyes filled and did not stop. I remember, sweetheart. I've always remembered how to hug you, even if I never got to. She walked into his arms. Dominic folded himself around her, and the 3 of them stood on the porch of a small cabin in the woods of Vermont, while the morning light slanted down through the pines, and none of them said anything at all. 4 months later, in a federal courthouse on Courthouse Way in South Boston, the long reckoning began. The indictment against Raymond Falcone ran 71 pages. Conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, money laundering across 3 national borders, identity fraud going back to the spring of 1997, racketeering under the federal statute that had buried 5 bosses before him. The government's recommendation at the top of page 1 was plain: life without the possibility of parole. The indictment against Salvatore Bianchi ran 44 pages. Conspiracy. Accessory to attempted murder. Continuing criminal enterprise. The recommendation there was 40 years. Dominic Moretti took the stand on the 3rd day under a partial immunity agreement that Special Agent Sarah Chen and a senior federal prosecutor had negotiated over 19 hours in a windowless conference room. In exchange for his complete cooperation against the Bianchi network, the nonviolent counts against the Moretti organization would not be pursued. He answered every question put to him for 6 hours, calmly, in a voice that never rose. Claire took the stand on the 5th day. She wore a plain, dark blue dress. Her hair was pinned back. She told the entire 6-year story, start to finish, from a hospital parking lot in Providence to a cold warehouse on the Southie waterfront. The court reporter had to ask her, twice, to slow down for the record. The gallery did not move. The morning papers had already given her a name. They called her, in headlines across 3 cities, the ghost wife of Boston. Raymond Falcone sat at the defense table with his wrists cuffed to a chain running to his waist. He did not look away from her. He did not speak. At the end of her testimony, Claire turned in the witness chair and spoke directly to him for the first and last time. Mr. Falcone, I do not hate you. I feel only for your son. He is 5 years old. He is growing up without a father. The way my daughter very nearly grew up without one. You chose revenge over him. That is the heaviest sentence any court will ever hand down to you, and you handed it to yourself." Raymond Falcone, for the first time in the 8 days he had sat in that courtroom, lowered his head. His shoulders began to shake. The sound that came out of him was low and broken. He was weeping. The jury returned on the afternoon of the 9th day. Life without parole for Falcone, 42 years for Bianchi. Outside the courthouse, in the wide marble corridor, Sophia Moretti was waiting. She had filed for divorce the same afternoon Dominic had told her the truth in his study. She was holding the hand of a small boy in a navy coat, her son with the man who had been her husband for 3 years. She walked up to Claire. "I am so sorry," she said, "for everything he did to you." Claire knelt down and looked at the child for a long moment, and then she stood and put her arms around the younger woman. "The boy is innocent," she said quietly against Sophia's hair, "and he is not your brother's or my husband's. He is ours." In the months that followed, Dominic did what he had said he would do. The warehouses on the harbor were folded into a clean freight company called Moretti Global Logistics. The off-book card rooms in Revere and Chelsea were closed. 140 employees were either retrained, reassigned, or severed with generous notice. Tommy Russo, who had refused to leave, became chief operating officer of the new company and wore a dress shirt to work for the first time in his life. Marcus Webb came home from the hospital on crutches after 11 days, returned to private practice in 12 weeks, and took on exactly one client, the Moretti Donovan family, for the rest of his career. Harold Finch wrote a book. He offered Claire 20% of the royalties in a handwritten note. She wrote back thanking him and asking that every dollar of her share be redirected into a scholarship fund for children of incarcerated parents. Special Agent Sarah Chen received the Bureau's Medal of Valor and a promotion to Assistant Special Agent in charge. On the morning the sentence was read, the Boston Globe ran a photograph across the top of the front page. Dominic, Claire, and Lily on the courthouse steps, hands joined, heads bent slightly forward against a cold March wind. The headline read, "The Moretti Ring, How a 6-year-old Ended a 20-year War." It did not look like a victory. It looked like something quieter. It looked like an ending. And perhaps that is what the story of Claire and Dominic Moretti really leaves us with. That the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, has a way of finding a small hand to point at it. That courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is a woman who chooses, for 6 years, to raise a child in silence so that the child can one day be raised in safety. Sometimes it is a man who lays down a crown because a single pancake breakfast with his daughter is worth more than an empire. And sometimes it is a little girl with a stuffed cat under her arm who sees a ring and simply tells the truth about what she sees. If this story moved you, we would love for you to stay with us. Please consider tapping the subscribe button and hitting the like and sharing this video with someone you love so that more hearts can find these stories with us every day. We would truly love to hear from you in the comments. How did Claire and Dominic's journey land in your heart? Is there a moment in your own life where the truth finally found its way into the light after years of silence? Tell us. Your story matters to us, and to everyone who reads these words after you. From all of us to all of you watching tonight, we wish you good health, a peaceful home, and days that grow gentler one at a time. Take care of yourselves. Take care of the people beside you. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next video.